Chapter 7. Beware, for I am fearless and therefore powerful. I will watch with the wiliness of a snake, that I may sting with its venom. The first time Elizabeth saw the monster, it was a fair June morning the week before her wedding. She had gone alone at dawn to paint watercolors in Plainpalais, not far from where William's body had been discovered. These days she only painted nature, clouds above mountains, fields and trees, flowers and fruit. These paintings had taken over her room. Tens, dozens, no, well over 100 watercolors. They lined the walls of her room, covering nearly every spare inch of plaster. Most of the paintings were botanical studies, but none of them resembled the exquisite flowers that had inspired her art, the irises, the roses, the tulips, for she'd painted them to reveal their secrets. Each appeared clumsy with its dissected organs and leaves splayed on the page, foul with curiosity. The watercolors felt an obsession. The more Elizabeth painted, the less she could think of anything else. Some whispered she'd gone mad, but she didn't care. Nor could she stop herself from creating them. That morning, Elizabeth set off to paint as she usually did. She didn't even realize she'd set her easel near William's spot until she saw an offering of flowers tied to the low bough of an apple tree. For William, a card attached to the bouquet said, "Forever in our hearts." The pale white roses were dried, decayed, indicating they'd been abandoned there some weeks earlier. All of a sudden, Elizabeth realized someone had left the bouquet for the anniversary of William's murder. He died in May 1794. It was now June 2 years later. How could so much time have passed? It felt more than a decade. She was a different woman, Victor a different man. Loss would do that. Besides William and Caroline, she'd lost Justine and even Ernest, who'd left home to further Napoleon's ambitions in Italy. Most of all, she'd lost Henry. He was only 26 years old, in the full of his potential, when his lifeless body was discovered on a beach in Ireland, a blow made worse when Victor was initially jailed for the murder. Beloved Henry, loyal Henry, her true mate, companion. I will never forgive myself. I should have never told Henry to go. This felt far worse than Caroline's death and that journal. Elizabeth had been in the process of writing Henry yet again when news of his strangling arrived, along with Victor's arrest in Ireland near where Henry's corpse was found. The shock of Henry's death left her incapacitated with grief. At first she thought to take her life with laudanum, but the sin of suicide weighed her soul. Sophie helped her expel the poison, returning Elizabeth to the land of the living. Afterward, she refused to leave her room, refused to bathe or comb her hair, while she ruminated on the unimaginable. Had Victor discovered her love for Henry and murdered him in a fit of jealousy? She'd wept tears of relief when Victor was proven innocent, though this didn't change her loss. Henry was dead. At least Ernest and Justine were alive. They had to be. A letter had arrived from Ernest 2 days earlier, who was stationed near Napoleon's encampment in Italy. As for Justine, earlier that spring Elizabeth had sent Signora Julia and Martin back to the Villa Lavenza to prepare the estate for her honeymoon. They reported they'd found no one in residence, not even little Ella. Elizabeth tried to shift her thoughts back to her painting. She couldn't. The bouquet seemed an omen. She should flee, return home. She didn't. Instead, she sank to her knees, her thin linen gown soaking with dew. She shut her eyes, pressing the sharp bones of her spine into the trunk of an oak. She welcomed the discomfort of tree bark along her ribs, the sense that her flesh might split into two if she pushed hard enough. Perhaps this would release a better Elizabeth, a less mournful Elizabeth, an Elizabeth able to giggle and please as she once had, the perfect Elizabeth she'd once been. Well, she'd marry Victor. She'd keep her promise to Caroline, make amends, make Alphonse happy. Henry was right. This is my fate. I have no free will. I never did. A bluebird sang, a crow scampered and called. Elizabeth opened her eyes. Perhaps this was the peace granted by God after a prayer, though she didn't feel serene. The back of her neck tingled, gooseflesh along her arms. And then she knew she was no longer alone. She sensed this as surely as a lover senses their beloved in their bed. She raised her head, squinting at the sun through the newly budded leaves. A pair of pale, cold eyes met her gaze from the top of the tree. The eyes weren't unkind, nor were they malicious. They just were, like the sketch she'd drawn that night in Lake Como. The eyes were surrounded by scarred flesh, lustrous black hair flowing down from where he nested in the boughs. She didn't scream, nor did she run. She hadn't the fortitude for that. After all, she hadn't eaten again that morning, nor did she take any supper the night before beyond some toast soaked in milk. I'm imagining this. I've been unwell. When Elizabeth next looked up, the monster was gone. A flock of jackdaws swelled in the sky, a surge of shadow eclipsing the sun. Their cries echoed. How ominous they sounded! Or was she imagining thus? She was dizzy, unsettled. Instead of resting until she regained strength, she drew a quick sketch of the white roses with the card. She slowly made her way home, determined to forget those sinister eyes, the threat she couldn't articulate, those jackdaws. "Uncle," she asked Alphonse upon her return, "do you know anything of this?" When she showed him her sketch of the roses, he pressed his fingertips against his eyelids. "I'm sorry, I didn't mean to upset you." Once Alphonse recovered, he confessed, "I leave them every year for William. The roses come from the conservatory in Bellerive. They bloom every May. I know I can bring them to the cemetery, but I prefer to think of our sweet boy as he was that day. So happy, so playful, before—" Her uncle gestured for words, overcome. Elizabeth took his hand. She knew he was thinking of Justine, blaming himself, blaming the judges for giving him reason to blame himself. She'd never told him about Justine's survival. After all, she'd promised. "I understand, Uncle." She kissed his cheek, which had gone grey and slack. His flesh bristled against her lips. Some days he didn't shave now that he was no longer a syndic. "God bless you, Elizabeth. I bless the day Caroline brought you to us. You're an angel. Victor will be fortunate to have you as his wife. Soon there will be new children, God willing. A new generation to bring us hope." Alphonse stood up, reaching for his cane. He'd never fully regained his health after his heart attack. "Here. Let me show you something. I haven't shown these to anyone, especially not Victor. He'd think me mad. But I trust you'll appreciate them." He unlocked a drawer from the lacquered corner cabinet in the dining room. The drawer contained letters upon letters, hundreds of them. Some appeared new, others yellowed with age. All were tucked into neat piles tied with black ribbons. What are these? Elizabeth had no idea. She'd assumed the drawer held silverware. Caroline. I've written her a letter nearly every day since her death. Well, especially since her death. I wrote her before she'd taken ill, when I thought I'd lose her when she gave birth to William. It became a habit. I've shared everything about our family she should know. He pulled out a stack. This one's from 1792, after you returned from Lake Como with Sophie and William. Caroline worked so hard to make sure you'd inherit your birthright. Another pile. And these are from last year, when we were waiting for Victor's return from England so you could wed. Alphonse smiled, his face relaxing. I've already dated a letter for your wedding. I can't wait to write it. She'd be so happy. She dreamt of this day for years. I know she would be happy too, Uncle. Outside, the rude blast of gunshots, the cold click of metal. She glanced out the window, heart pounding. It couldn't be an uprising, could it? Victor downstairs in the courtyard with a pistol. He was shooting at a target set against an elm. Bang! His eyes looked glazed, drugged. "What are you doing?" she shouted from the window. He gritted his teeth as he released another round. "Protecting us!" Bang! That night, Elizabeth dreamt of the monster, along with Caroline. This time, her aunt led her to St. Peter's instead of Henry's shop, which no longer existed. Monsieur Clerval had shuttered it, too bereft to continue without his son. Inside the cathedral, the stained glass windows cast coloured shadows along the wall, and rows of votive candles flickered. "I was wed here," Caroline told Elizabeth, pointing at the vaulted ceilings, the marble altar. "Now you'll be a bride of Frankenstein, too." "Aunt, do you know of Uncle's letters?" Elizabeth asked. "Are they a secret?" Caroline patted Elizabeth's hand. "I read every one of them. That's how I know everything, even about Victor." "What about Victor?" Within her dream, Elizabeth was somehow able to recall him shooting the pistol that afternoon. "He's been acting peculiar. Do you know anything about this?" Caroline set a finger against Elizabeth's lips. "It's coming," she warned. "You should leave, or it'll be too late, darling. I'll be here if you need me. Always." The candles blew out, and the doors from the west burst open. Instead of light flooding the cathedral, water rushed into the church. Had the lake flooded? It must have. Waves rising, Bibles floating, the organ chortling with broken chords. Elizabeth tried to swim as the water rose to the pews, toward the stained glass. Her soaked gown was so heavy, dragging her down. She reached for a column, an archway, her fingers straining for succor. Beneath the waves, she saw a pair of dun-colored eyes staring at her. Lifeless, merciless, sorrowful. The monster. He reached for her throat. Elizabeth awoke from her dream, flailing for air. Her hands confronted the weight of another head beside hers on the pillow. Victor! He'd crept into her bed while she slept. She shrieked. "Shush! I didn't mean to startle you," Victor whispered, stroking her brow. "I've been thinking so much about us. Our past. I miss us as we were." "I miss us too." Her breath sounded ragged in the dark. "How happy we were then. You, me, Henry, even Justine." Elizabeth trembled. Was it hunger? Surprise? "Things can never be as they were, Victor. Because Henry is gone." "I know, beloved. But we still have each other." Victor curled about her, his flesh as cool as her body was bony. For a moment she feared he'd touch her breasts, her stomach, kiss her as a husband would have a right to. But he only sighed and nestled his chin against the curve of her neck. "I love you, Elizabeth. You're the only perfect thing in my life. I don't deserve you." She didn't sleep the rest of the night, recalling her dream with Caroline. The monster. Elizabeth returned to Plain Palais at dawn. This time she didn't bother to bring her watercolor kit. The monster awaited her, seated beneath the blossoming apple trees as she expected. He stank of rotting fish and leaves and mildew. Death. A cluster of jackdaws rested around his legs, pecking at vermin. "Tell me who you are," she demanded. "Are you real?" The monster was more horrific than she'd anticipated. Besides his gruesome appearance, he was dressed in filthy rags that appeared stolen from clotheslines, his feet bound in blood-stained furs. He raised a scarred brow. "You're unlike the others. You don't flee. You don't scream. I'm impressed." A cold laugh. "I didn't expect this from Victor's future wife." Elizabeth ignored the pounding of her heart, the faintness of her head. "You know Victor?" "More than I wish." The monster rose to his feet, his head reaching the trees. The jackdaws took to the sky. How could someone be so tall? "I've been watching you for some time, Elizabeth Lavenza." "Who are you?" she asked again. He knew Victor. He knew her name. He knew they were to marry. Perhaps this was another dream. She clenched a handful of apple leaves and crushed them in her palms. They were sappy and verdant. Real. "I know much about you, Elizabeth. I can see you wish to die." "I don't want to die." Her stomach growled. She recalled the taste of laudanum. "But you've been starving yourself, haven't you? You appear a skeleton covered in flesh." All this was too true. Elizabeth knew others gossiped about her condition. She'd caught the pitying looks in the square, the whispers. She used to be such a beauty. Consumption. Now all she does is paint pictures all day. But it wasn't tuberculosis Elizabeth suffered from. She hadn't meant to starve herself, not intentionally. Over time, her hunger had been replaced by an almost euphoric detachment. The detachment was a relief, a gift. She no longer yearned for food. She no longer yearned for anything. Not really. "It's been a sad time," she finally answered. "You're sad because your soul is no longer whole. I alone can behold this." Her eyes pooled with unshed tears. "Can you?" The monster nodded. "Half your soul resides elsewhere, not with the living." "That's not true." But it was. She tried to run, but the monster grabbed her arm. He shoved her against the ground, his elbows sharp against the root of her spine. She struggled, but only for a moment. "Let me speak, Elizabeth Lavenza. Listen to me. I can help you and your family whom you love." The monster's breath caught in his throat. "And who love you." "How do you know this?" "I can tell, for no one loves me. I am all alone in the world. I have no friend, no companion as you do. If you agree to all I say, your family will be safe." And then he told her, "I will be with you on your wedding night." "Why should I believe you?" And then the monster told her the story of his creation and all that had occurred since. She listened to him without running away, without protesting. She listened to him with a mounting sense of dread, followed by a peculiar serenity. The monster made sense, like the end of a book you'd been reading for a long time. She recalled Victor's rantings after William's death, the green journal beneath his pillow, his alchemy books, the mercurial behavior since his return from Ingolstadt, the chemistry set, his surgery kit, his insistence on traveling before their wedding to an island near the top of the world. Those glimpses of unnaturally tall men in Ingolstadt, Plainpalais, and in the rain. It was a relief to know the truth at last. She'd suspected as much from the moment she'd finally laid eyes on the monster. After all, had she not anticipated him, dreamt of and drawn him? She'd conjured him from her darkest nightmares and given him life in her art. The monster was alchemy born of flesh and presumption and abandonment, just as she'd been in her way thanks to the Frankensteins. In her deepest heart, she expected his arrival just as she'd expected she'd never find happiness after Henry's death. The monster was inevitable. Still, she asked him, "What proof have you?" He gave her a pile of letters. Her letters, the ones she'd written weekly to Henry after his departure. The ones Henry never answered. They remained unopened. "Why did you steal these?" she shouted, clutching the letters to her heart as she fell to her knees. "Why? Why?" "Because Victor must marry you for my revenge to be complete." Suddenly Elizabeth understood. Victor's monster had murdered Henry, just as he'd murdered William and framed Justine for his death. It was him all along. She and Henry never had a chance. Yet at the end, when the monster finished speaking, it wasn't Henry or Victor Elizabeth recalled, nor was it Caroline and Alphonse, who'd been the most loving guardians she could have desired. Nor did she think of the green journal and the scarlet fever accompanying it. No, it was Maria she thought of. Maria in that apple orchard so long ago when Elizabeth was a child of 4. and the day when she first slapped her. 3 days passed. During this time, Elizabeth didn't encounter the monster again, though she did find 6 jackdaws waiting outside the garden door. Nor did she return to Plainpalais. Anyway, she and the monster had said all they needed. Besides, she was a bride. There was a wedding to prepare for. Then came the night before the wedding, where celebratory speeches were made and she drank too much wine on an empty stomach and threw up in her bedroom. During the dinner, Alphonse grew sentimental and toasted, "Heavy misfortunes have befallen us, but let us cling closer to what remains and transfer our love for those we have lost to those who may yet live." At last, the morning of the wedding arrived. A church ceremony in St. Peter's, a breakfast following in the Hôtel de Ville. Though Alphonse had resigned as syndic, the Frankensteins still held sway. Afterward, she and Victor returned to the house on the Rue des Granges to collect their luggage for their honeymoon. But first, Elizabeth had a final letter to write. She could no longer procrastinate. "My beloved Henry," she began. "Today was my wedding day. I know I should be thinking of Victor, but all I can think of is you. Though it has been 6 months since I first learned of your death, I still have so many regrets, so many wishes. Most of all, I wish I hadn't told you to accompany Victor to Scotland. This I shall mourn forever." A teardrop smudged the ink. Elizabeth crossed out her last sentence with a vehement penstroke. "I must confess something. At first I believed your murder to be my fault. I envisioned Victor discovering my love for you, and in his madness, yes, I will write that word, smiting your life in a temper. I even wondered if he'd found those letters I sent you. But now I know differently. My family is cursed for reasons I dare not set on this page. For how else can fate explain the loss of you, of William, and my aunt in the space of 8 years? But that's not all, Henry. If I am to be completely honest in this letter, I will admit I even wondered whether Victor loved another woman. He'd been so distant since his return from Ingolstadt. Since then, I've discovered the true reason for his inattention. This reason is a terrible thing wrought of death and hubris, one I never believed Victor capable of creating, even with his genius. Still, Victor and I are wed, and here I am writing you, wishing more than ever you were by my side. Ah, Henry, how shall I bear it? These losses, this sorrow? But today should be a day for celebration. After all, I am now the wife of your best friend, the man who'd been my playmate, my adopted cousin. I can imagine my aunt smiling upon our union. I have fulfilled my vow to her. This shall have to be my comfort. However, what bothers me most is that you and I had no true farewell before your death. Now that you're gone, I wonder whether you sensed your life would be snuffed so cruelly. When the murderer snuck into your room, did you struggle? Were your last thoughts of God, or of me and our love? I pray you were taken in your sleep, where you felt no pain, only peace, as you moved into everlasting life with our Heavenly Father. Lacking such a farewell, this letter shall serve as my adieu to you, the noblest and kindest man I have ever known. I will love you until my last breath and beyond. May a host of angels bear my words to you, in whatever realm you now inhabit. Elizabeth Frankenstein, Geneva, June 16th, 1796. Elizabeth covered the inkwell and wiped her nib. On the other side of the wall she heard Victor in his room, drawers slamming and shutting. What was he looking for? She recalled the moment when he swore to be her husband during their wedding ceremony. He looked so stricken by terror that the priest teased, "I'm glad you're taking your vows so seriously, Monsieur Frankenstein. But this is a happy moment. Can you attempt to smile?" Everyone laughed but Elizabeth. She stared around the church, imagining those missing in the pews. The priest had asked, "Do you take this man as your husband?" "I will," she answered. She felt no joy, only foreboding. Their kiss felt like the kiss of strangers. But that was then. Now she was Madame Frankenstein, wife to a madman who'd created a monster against God's will. A wife who didn't love her husband. A wife who was writing a love letter to a dead man who'd been murdered by this same monster in an era when men killed kings and science replaced alchemy. She'd blotted the letter when a knock arrived on the other side of her door. Victor, no doubt, ready to leave. "Madame Frankenstein?" Not Victor, Sophie. Elizabeth folded the letter into a tight rectangle. "Enter." "No need, madame. Your carriage awaits." "So does your husband." Here Sophie giggled from the hallway. "Who says you'll need to hurry to catch the ferry to Evian." Elizabeth's throat tightened. "Tell my husband I will be down immediately." She put on her lace manteau, her straw bonnet. A last look in her mirror. How thin she appeared, how exhausted. She'd chosen to wear white, the colour of purity, the colour of mourning. The same colour as those roses for William she'd found in Plainpalais. The ivory muslin gown made her complexion appear sallow, though it was the latest mode. Victor had purchased it when he stopped in Paris during his return from Ireland. The gown draped loose on her, but that was the style, or so she claimed. Downstairs, she could hear Victor speaking to Alphonse, his voice high with impatience. He'd left his room, presumably finding whatever he was searching for. Downstairs, she could hear the carriage waiting outside in the courtyard, the horses nickering amid the stench of equine manure. Sophie knocked again. "Madame?" "Coming." A last look around her childhood room. The letter from Henry tight in her grasp. For their wedding night, Victor had decided they'd stay on the shores of Evian before continuing to the Villa Lavenza, where they'd honeymoon. But Elizabeth knew the truth. They'd never arrive in Lake Como. Victor's son would take care of that. "I will be with you on your wedding night." Elizabeth tucked the letter to Henry into her stays, against her heart. She smoothed her hair. She opened the door. Chapter 8. I shuddered to think who might be the next victim sacrificed to his insatiate revenge, and then I thought again of his words. "I will be with you on your wedding night." In the courtyard outside the Frankenstein mansion, a petite, hunchbacked woman dressed in male attire watched from the back of a crowd of well-wishers. A woman many would consider a monster if they were to catch a close glimpse. All awaited Victor and Elizabeth, who'd returned from St. Peter's an hour prior after being joined as husband and wife before God and society. They were late. When the newlyweds finally emerged to leave on their honeymoon, the well-wishers threw rose petals the colour of cream. Their funereal scent cloyed the air. "To the bride!" Alphonse cried, his wrinkled face bright with joy. "To the groom!" others responded. "May he make his bride happy tonight." Elizabeth blanched. "Victor has always made me happy." Victor kissed her hand before offering a gallant bow. "I've never loved anyone but you, Madame Elizabeth Frankenstein. Rely upon it." He embraced his father, accepted handshakes and kisses all around. It seemed as though Alphonse had invited everyone from Geneva society, like that holiday soiree years ago. The bells of St. Peter's struck 3. "Go, my children," Alphonse cried. "Be happy." The couple rushed to the carriage and then the ferry for Evian, which they boarded a moment before the gate closed. Therefore they did not take note of the hunchbacked woman who followed them onto the ferry, stealthy as a thief. As the ferry twined its way across the lake toward Evian, Victor and Elizabeth remained on the deck. The hunchbacked woman disguised in male attire did too. She raised her hood to hide her face as she eavesdropped. "I'm so happy," Elizabeth lied to Victor. She now wore a simple gold band above Caroline's emerald ring. "Tell me you're happy too, Victor." "I am, beloved," he replied, staring out at the water. His hand shifted to his jacket pocket. He patted its contents, his gaze darting. The pistol, Elizabeth knew it. His eyes narrowed as he glanced over his shoulder. "What is it, Victor?" What is it that bothers you so? He answered after a moment's pause. If you knew what I have suffered, and what I may yet endure. I hope there is nothing to distress you. Elizabeth's voice faltered. She remained oh so conscious of that farewell letter to Henry tucked against her breast, along with the promise she'd made to the monster during their final encounter in Plainpalais. She'd never reveal her vow to a living soul. Victor caressed her cheek. You are sorrowful, my love. Be assured that if a lively joy is not painted in my face, my heart is content, she lied again. Observe how beautiful the clouds are above Mont Blanc. Look at the sun setting beyond the lake, the fish swimming in the clear water. What a divine day! How serene all appears. And for a moment Elizabeth's words invoking the perfection of nature soothed her hollow heart. But in a perfect world she would not be making trite observations about clouds and fish to calm Victor's nerves. In a perfect world, William and Caroline would still be alive, and Elizabeth would have wed Henry, entrusting her aunt to understand that a marriage without love was no marriage at all. But the world is not perfect. She's married a madman who created a monster sown of corpses. I fear, my beloved wife, Victor replied, that little happiness remains for us on earth. Yet everything I cherish is centered in you. I have one secret, Elizabeth, a dreadful one. When revealed to you, it will chill your frame with horror. I will confide this secret after our wedding night. And I already know this secret. The ferry approached Evian, where pine-laden mountains descended precipitously to the lake. A ruined castle laid atop the tallest peak. As a line of travellers queued for the dock, Victor offered Elizabeth his arm. She accepted it. Shall we? She asked, pointing to the dock. A corner of Victor's mouth tipped in an uneven grin. After you, my wife. No, she replied, concocting a grin of her own. Together, my husband. Until my last breath. It was 8 o'clock when the ferry landed in Evian. Justine arrived at the hotel moments before Elizabeth and Victor, who had first gone for a walk on the shore. Other than the hotel's aspect on the lake, it was nothing special, Justine decided. The sort of structure built to accommodate travelers who required a night's rest before continuing to more scenic destinations. She was relieved the hotel was only 2 stories high, with windows unimpeded by trees. She spied on the newlyweds from a window facing the hotel registry, close enough to overhear them request the bridal chamber. She searched for the monster, but found no sign of his arrival. No broken branches overhead, no footprints. The wind rose with great violence from the west, and clouds swept across the moon swifter than the flight of the vulture. Suddenly, a heavy rainstorm descended. Justine had no choice but to submit to its fury. Soon, Elizabeth and Victor were alone in the bridal chamber. It possessed 3 tall windows, 2 overlooking the lake, and a third with a ledge large enough for Justine to hide herself. The chamber was furnished with a large wardrobe and an even larger bed hung with brocade curtains the same hue as an alpine forest. Justine had never seen such an expansive bed. By then, night had arrived in earnest. A candelabra set on a side table spilled a soft light to discreetly illuminate the proceedings. On the lake side of the room, the drapes billowed. The proprietor, a stout, grey-haired man, had opened the windows to air out the room despite the rain. Victor rushed to shutter the windows, his hands visibly shaking. He checked inside the wardrobe, patted his jacket. We should have requested a 2nd-story room. Victor's tone was agitated, Justine decided. What distresses you, Victor? What is it you fear? Elizabeth's eyes avoided the bed, where someone had sprinkled pink rose petals across the pale, lacy linens for the newlyweds. Oh, peace, my love, peace. This night is dreadful, very dreadful. He approached the door after patting his jacket a last time. I'll return in a half-hour. Until then, I implore you to not unlock the door or the windows. Do not leave this room. Elizabeth, to Justine's surprise, did not show emotion in reaction to her husband's edict. As soon as Victor locked the door behind him, Elizabeth rushed to unlock it along with the windows. With this, Justine no longer bothered to hide herself. She flung her body inside the room, rolling across the carpeted floor until she lay at her benefactress's feet. "It was you," Elizabeth cried, embracing Justine with all her might. "My darling Justine, I thought I spied you on the ferry. I didn't believe my eyes. Elizabeth, listen to me. And your voice, it's returned. Have you come to wish me farewell, then? What a risk you've taken." Justine clutched Elizabeth's hands. "You must flee. Victor is in danger for reasons I cannot say." A half smile. "No, he's not." "But he is. Come with me. We'll live together like sisters." Joy drained from Elizabeth's face. "I can't." Justine grabbed Elizabeth by her shoulders. "You must. Victor has secrets. Enemies. Elizabeth, we've no time." Elizabeth offered a hollow laugh. "You don't know what I know. I know enough. I know Victor isn't who you believe him to be. I know you can't save him." Elizabeth burst out, "It's not only Victor." Justine didn't understand, but there was no time to question. She fell to her knees. "I'm begging you, let me protect you as you did me. Anything you need of me, I will do for you, please." Elizabeth shook her head. "I'm meant to be Victor's wife. I've no choice." "That's not true. Come." For a moment, Justine thought Elizabeth would acquiesce. Her mouth softened. She reached for Justine's hand. She'd leave with Justine. They'd be saved. Justine imagined the monster awaiting outside, the two of them slipping away before it was too late. The life they'd lead, the triumph and relief. Elizabeth pushed Justine toward the open window. "Go! Quickly!" There was a finality to Elizabeth's tone that stole all hope from Justine. "Very well, I leave," Justine said. "But first I've a wedding present. Open your hand." Elizabeth waited until after Justine's departure to look down at her hand. A small, sharp knife lay in her palm, one Justine must have taken from the Villa Lavenza. Elizabeth recognized her parents' initials engraved on the silver handle. A pang of bittersweet yearning rose as she thought of her mother and her father, the hopes they must have held for her life. Not that it mattered any longer, though Elizabeth had been moved by Justine's attempt to save her. It had taken all of Elizabeth's strength to resist Justine's entreaties, more than Elizabeth realized she possessed. As she listened to Justine, Elizabeth felt torn in two. There she was on her wedding night, Justine begging her to save herself. There she was 4 days earlier, with the monster in Plainpalais. The two versions of Elizabeth wrestled each other, like an angel versus a demon. Ultimately, the demon won. Now alone in the bridal chamber, Elizabeth recalled her final conversation with the monster. "Victor created me in Ingolstadt, but cursed me to remain alone in all this world," he'd told her. "It's his fault I've become what I am. A demon, a monster, Lucifer fallen from heaven, hated by all. My father made me miserable when he should have granted me happiness." "Is not happiness our responsibility?" Elizabeth had reasoned. This sounded like something Ernest would say. "How can one be happy when all alone in this world? I have no friends, no companion, no mate." Elizabeth responded with a dawning horror. "You want me to be your mate?" The monster shook his head. "I want one of my own kind, so she will not reject me. Victor promised this. That's why he fled to the Orkney Islands. But he did not keep his word. He destroyed my mate before she was to receive life." "You want revenge on Victor?" The monster nodded. "But I'll spare him, if you'll help me." When the monster launched into his proposal, Elizabeth offered him the same rapt attention a country girl would an aristocratic seducer. "If you agree to my proposal," he said, "I will be with you on your wedding night." Elizabeth immediately understood. She recalled Henry's broken neck, the bruises along William's throat. "Once Victor suffers as I suffer, my revenge will be satisfied. I'll let Victor live, along with your uncle and everyone else you care about, even Justine. They'll remain safe for the rest of their lives." Somehow she found words to respond. "But that's only them. How can I trust you'll harm no one else?" "I swear I won't. I'll become mild as a lamb. I'll go to South America, where I'll live peacefully on roots and berries for the rest of my days." How caressing the monster's words had been, how compelling. Elizabeth also felt an odd responsibility toward him. After all, if Victor was his father, was she not his mother in a sense? She even recalled those drawings she'd made years ago of the dead animals and her nude body in that secret sketchbook. Perhaps she and Victor were more alike than not. She agreed. How easy it had been to give in to the monster's wishes, like letting yourself drown in a storm you knew you'd never survive. But she did have the presence of mind to ask him to put his promise in writing. A contract. A devil's bargain. She'd have to trust him to honor it. When Elizabeth signed the monster's contract, she imagined no more sorrow, no more hunger, no more guilt, no more awareness of Henry's death. Yes, she could have refused. Yes, she could run away, but what was the point? The monster would find her. Hadn't he followed Victor and Henry all the way to Scotland to work his mischief? Before the monster departed, he'd caressed her neck. "I'll see you on your wedding night, Elizabeth." And now that wedding night had arrived at last. Elizabeth opened her eyes, returning to the present moment. There she was in the bridal suite, with its open windows and unlocked door, dressed in her ivory bridal gown, which Victor had brought her all the way from Paris. "This is my fate," she told herself. An odd giddiness rose. She unpinned her hair, unlaced her stays, until all she wore was her thin silk chemise. She took one last look in her mirror, arranged her gold curls about her shoulders. She kissed the letter to Henry a final time. She threw it into the lake. As the letter floated away, she contemplated dropping her parents' knife beside it. She didn't. She set the knife beneath her pillow, a bitter relic of the mother and father she'd never known. She blew out the candles, pitching the room into shadows. She lay on her bridal bed, resting atop the lacy linens and rose petals. She threaded her fingers together. She stared up toward the ceiling, beyond, toward the stars. This is how they shall find me. The mantel clock ticked away. Elizabeth remained on the bed in the dark, still alone, still waiting for the monster. Nor had Victor returned. No doubt he was still outside the hotel, pacing back and forth, that pistol in his hand. His fingers tapping back and forth like Caroline. More minutes passed. The rain ceased and the pale yellow light of the moon illuminated the chamber. For some reason, Elizabeth recalled that snowy December morning years ago when she'd discovered Justine frozen beneath the oak in Belle-Rive. While Elizabeth had lain there with her in the snow, they'd been approached by an albino fox. Elizabeth had watched the veins in the creature's translucent ears pulse with life, his colorless eyes staring into her soul. He'd appeared so vulnerable, yet so brave. I will be brave. And then Elizabeth was no longer alone. The odor of death drifted from beneath the mattress. It mingled with fragrance of those rose petals, so lush with life, scattered across her bridal bed. The monster. He'd hidden beneath that enormous bed, waiting the entire time for Elizabeth. He'd eavesdropped on her exchange with Justine, witnessed her preparations, heard Victor leave the room. He must have swum all the way to Evian to evade capture hours ago. How had she not noticed? She willed herself to remain unmoving on the bed. She had the monster slide out from beneath the bed, rise to his feet. His movements were slow as he drew closer, hesitant, her nose clotted with his fetid stench, the damp rising from his flesh. He believed her asleep, Hadn't he promised as much during their last encounter in Plainpalais? He'd vowed he'd wait until she slept to strangle her. But who could sleep, knowing death would arrive? Now, lying there in the dark on her wedding night, in a bed where she'd been meant to become a wife in the full sense of the act, Elizabeth's eyes filled. When she'd agreed to the monster's proposal, she'd been so certain of her willingness to sacrifice her life to save those she loved. Now her hunger to live rose bright and strong. She hadn't expected this. How mutable are my feelings! How strange is the love we have of life, even in the excess of misery. She thought of the life she'd once hoped to lead. She thought of the life she'd leave behind. She thought of Victor, of her uncle, Ernest, and even Justine, on whom the monster might satisfy his cruel and merciless passions. She even thought of Caroline, though no one could harm her now. Despite the monster's vow that Elizabeth's death would complete his revenge, could she trust him? Who would he destroy next? What if Victor had constructed the monster to live forever? Would he patiently await Ernest's children, their children? Would he really honor a written contract that only he knew existed? This possibility plunged Elizabeth into a reverie so despairing that all of her strength rose. And then she knew she wouldn't succumb to fate, no matter how ordained it appeared. Her parents' knife, it awaited beneath her pillow. I will have courage. The blade felt cold against her palm, so small, so sharp. I will survive. She must have shifted on the bed, for the monster addressed her. You're awake, he whispered. I trusted you'd be asleep by now. She cringed against the bed linens. Who can slumber knowing their life is about to be snuffed? Indeed. A soft laugh. Are you prepared for death, Elizabeth Frankenstein? Yes, she lied. Best to take him unaware. Best to play along. I'll be as gentle as I can be. Don't struggle. That will make it worse. If you let your body give way to me, you shan't feel a thing. I truly am sorry about this, Elizabeth. Victor left me with no choice. The monster laid his body beside hers. Elizabeth's heart thudded. How large he was, how long! Victor had constructed his son like a god fallen from heaven. He was all muscles and sinew, strength and bones. Should I stab him now or wait? In the neck or in the heart? He shifted closer. She made an involuntary squeaking sound, a shudder. His fingers felt like snakes as they crept up her torso, toward her breasts. Higher. You're nervous, he said, caressing the column of her neck. You're trembling. But you're brave. You don't scream. You lie there like a saint awaiting martyrdom. What did you expect? Her blood was so loud in her ears, rushing like a river, her heart a drum, thumping, thumping. Beneath her pillow, her hand curled around the handle of the blade. It felt so fragile. It's sharp. That's all that matters. I'd think you'd take joy, knowing your life will save Victor's. He kissed her cheek. He was trembling too. His voice broke. I'll be quick. It'll be over soon. No, it won't. Elizabeth pulled out the knife. She aimed for his heart. She struck hard. She stabbed until her hands were sticky with blood. A gunshot. A scream that rang out louder than any ever heard. Chapter 9. Suddenly I heard a shrill and dreadful scream. It came from the room into which Elizabeth had retired. Alphonse, who'd been sleeping the peaceful slumber of elders whose life ambitions have been met, heard the scream all the way across the lake in Geneva. He awoke, heart jittering and flesh prickling, and rushed toward the window, his bare feet slipping on the rug. Terror, that's what he felt. But why? Hadn't he gone to bed so filled with contentment? "Sophie! Sophie!" he shouted, flailing from the floor. "What can it be?" Sophie ran into the room. "Where are you, monsieur?" "Here. Help me up, child. Where are my slippers? Did you hear the scream?" "I heard something." Sophie threw open the window after setting him on his feet. Outside, a pale yellow moon shone. Goosebumps rose along her arms. Something was wrong. Something was evil, though she couldn't explain why. "Whatever it was, all's silent now." It wasn't. The scream was repeated a second time, more of a bellow than a shout. Across the Place du Bourg de Fort, a nest of jackdaws cawed and took flight, determined to abandon Geneva for a place of sanctuary. East of Geneva, in the Villa Lavenza, Signora Giulia and Martin was snoring in each other's arms, exhausted after a long day of readying the villa for the bride and groom, who'd soon arrive for their honeymoon. They'd also raised a glass too many in celebration of Signorina Elizabeth's wedding. As a result, they were too drunk to hear the screams that rode across the Alps all the way from Evian. Still, they sensed something, for Signora Giulia rose hours before dawn, convinced she'd heard Ella, whose soul she believed was restless. The housekeeper hadn't written Elizabeth of the girl's murder. What if her mistress never returned? "Poor child," Signora Giulia murmured, setting a plate of sausage on the kitchen table for Ella. "I wish you had a different fate." It had been such a shock to come upon the girl's corpse in the woods. They'd never discovered who'd assaulted her. Martin believed a soldier on his way to war. Donna Giulia returned to bed, where Martin awaited. "There you are," he mumbled. He set his hands on her broad hips. She refused his advance, distressed by something she couldn't identify. How fast her heart tripped. South of Lake Como, Ernest Frankenstein was sleeping hard on a battlefield outside Mantua, not far from where Napoleon's tent had been struck. He had no idea his brother had finally wed Elizabeth, or that Victor had created a monster, or that Henry Clerval was murdered and Justine survived her hanging. Therefore, though he'd heard the screams from Evian, it drew no alarm, not at first. The soldier who slept beside Ernest frequently shouted in sleep. He'd blasted off an ear in battle, which left him partially deaf. Ernest's vision of how the world should be after the revolution had never included this. Eventually, Ernest opened his eyes. He shuddered despite the summer torpor, but told himself it was nothing. His heart rushed, his body shook. Coward. He licked his dry lips and coughed. Weak lungs, strong heart. He should have been a poet instead. Ernest forced himself to settle back in, nose pressed against his military-issued wool blanket. He inhaled deeply. Whatever the country, the earth always smelled of blood. And then a third and final scream rang out. By the time the final scream settled into a hum back in Evian, all that remained in the bridal chamber was a hollow-cheeked groom clutching a pistol, a hunchback girl with a ball of lead in her shoulder, a small silver knife on the floor, a broken window where a wounded monster had escaped, and a virgin bride on the bed with her neck snapped.